How's it going, guys? I'm Mike Dwyer from the Bunker Recordings and BetterMixes.com. So a lot of people are stuck at home right now. And for some people, that can make it pretty challenging to record. Maybe at home, you only have like a small 2-channel interface or something, or you only have 1 or 2 microphones. So you might be thinking that there's just no way you can get cool drum sounds with such a small setup. But I just want to show you today that even if you only have 1 input or 1 microphone, we can still get a cool drum sound. So for this test, I set up 1 microphone. I'm using a 3U Audio Warbler mic, and I'm using that because I think I paid like under $300 for it. So it should be fairly comparable to something you might have in your home studio. I didn't want to be using like a fancy $1,000 or $2,000 mic for this. So this is what I was using. And I'll put up a couple pictures here just so you can see about where I had it placed. So I've got it just like a couple feet above the kit, and I've got it right above the kick drum, kind of pointed maybe a 45-degree angle down towards the snare and toms. Now, a couple quick notes about recording minimal mic drum setups. I mean, this is really true of recording any drums, but it's even more true the fewer mics you have. So first off, you need your drums to sound good. They need to be in tune, and they need to sound good in the room. With only 1 microphone, it's a lot harder to make big drastic changes to individual elements of the kit. So if your snare drum isn't sounding how you want it to sound in the room, it's going to be hard to fix it. And the other thing is the drummer basically has to mix themselves. With only 1 mic, I can't turn the kick and the snare up and turn the hi-hat down or anything like that. So the drummer has to level him or herself and play each element of the kit at the right intensity. In most cases, this means playing the shells, the kick, the snare, and the toms, especially the snare, harder and easing up on the cymbals a little bit. If the drummer is just bashing on the cymbals with a single mic, there's not a whole lot you're going to be able to do. But anyway, let's see what the mic sounds like with no processing. So not too bad. The drums themselves sound pretty good, and the balance is decent as well. The kick and snare are fairly loud, and there's not a ton of hi-hat. So that's a good place to start. So let's see what we did to process this. So I'm actually going to start with my second insert here, which is Soothe 2. I made a whole video about this plugin, so if you want to learn more about it, I'll put a link up here in the corner. But basically, this is going to be dynamically smoothing out the upper mid-range and top end. It's primarily looking between 4 and 5K here, but it's kind of looking at that whole range. So let's see what it's doing. So it's definitely making that smoother, but it's not making a huge difference yet. And that's because I have this here to really be taming down what I'm doing in my EQ before it. So let's open this up. I've got Pro Q3 and I'm doing a whole lot of EQ here. So let's just hear a before and after of this, and then we'll talk real quick about what we're doing with it. All right, so first we have a resonant high-pass filter. So we're just cutting out some super low-end rumble, and in the process, boosting a whole ton around 50 hertz, just to give the kick some extra oomph. Then here, just shy of 200 hertz, I have a dynamic boost that's just boosting the fundamental of the snare drum each time it hits. Then I've got a tiny little mid-range cut, only 1.5 decibels, not a whole lot going on there. Then I have a couple of big top-end boosts. I've got a 10 decibel boost at 11K, and a 7 decibel boost at 5K, and then a couple cuts to smooth those boosts out. One here at 4K, and then just using a gentle low pass filter around 17K. So again, we're boosting a ton of top end, boosting kind of the fundamental of the kick and the snare, and just carving out a couple of ugly frequencies. And you know, this EQ might look pretty extreme, and it kind of is, but when you're only working with 1 mic, you can't be afraid to make drastic moves to make it work. If you had a kick mic inside your kick drum, that would naturally have all of this low end and probably a lot more snap to it. And same thing with the snare drum. With a 57 right up on the snare, you'd have all this body here and a whole lot more crack up here as well. So we're just trying to get that extra oomph and the extra presence out of our shells here. So next up, I'm using a transient designer, and I'm boosting the attack a little bit and cutting the sustain. Let's hear what that's doing. So just kind of bringing the kick and snare forward a little bit and tucking the hi-hat down. I probably could have done a better job of leveling myself when I was recording the drums and not play the hi-hat so hard, but this is just kind of trying to make up for that a little bit. Next up, we have a compressor. I'm using Moosey from Klanghelm. So this is kind of a Fairchild emulation. I'm in limit mode and timing 2. And I have the mix dialed back just a little bit to 67%, just to let a little bit of the dry through. Let's hear that. So that's sounding pretty cool. If you're going for more of a clean kind of drum sound, a different compressor might work better, something like a VCA style compressor, something with a little more snap to it. But in this case, I was liking the kind of crunchiness I was getting from this. Next up, I've got Slate's virtual tape machine. Let's see what that's doing. And you can see I'm hitting that pretty hard, especially when the snare hits. Got the little overloading light going on each snare hit. But so this is just kind of thickening up a little bit, adding some harmonics, smoothing out the top end just a little bit. Again, if you're looking for a snappier, cleaner drum sound, you could probably just skip this altogether. But this worked well for the kind of crunchy sound I was looking for. Next up, I've got a reverb, in this case, McDSP's Revolver. And this is a convolution reverb, and I think I'm using an impulse from the Neve room at Alaire Studios. But pretty much any reverb will work for this. I'm basically trying to get two things with this. One is just a little bit of width. Since we only have one mic, it's obviously mono. But by putting a stereo reverb on it, we're just getting a little bit of left and right action going on, just to give it a tiny bit of width. And then also, it's kind of emulating having room mics set up. If you want to learn more about choosing a reverb for a fake room sound, I'll link a video in the top right corner. But let's just see what this is doing for us. So like I said, just adding a little bit of width and a little bit of ambience. We've got the reverb pretty low. It's about 15 decibels below our dry signal. Let's just solo it up so you can hear what the reverb itself sounds like. So fairly short, just like, a good drum room. Then next up, I'm using Slate's 1176 plugin. And my idea with this was putting it after the reverb would kind of push the drums into that room and pump up that room sound a little bit. And it'll also just kind of help us get that extra crunchy sound that I'm looking for. Let's check it out. So that's sounding pretty cool. And I have the mix knob dialed way back, only down at 20%. So it's primarily the dry signal, but I just want to add a little bit of that extra attitude. And then finally, I have one more EQ. Just after I had done all this processing, there were just a couple things I wanted to tweak. So I've got a tilt band here, just kind of boosting the high end and cutting the low end a little bit. Just felt it was a little unbalanced. Then I've got a boost at 90 hertz, just giving a little extra thump. Small cut around 170. I'd probably just boosted that a little too much in that first EQ, because that's right around the snare fundamental. So I just dialed that back a little bit. Totally could have just went back to my first EQ plugin and dialed this down a little bit, but whatever. Then I've got a couple small cuts here, one at 2K, one at 6K, both just tiny cuts, just smoothing it out a little bit. Then kind of a medium cut here at 8K. And I think this frequency was just really poking out to me on the hi-hat, so it's just taming that down. So let's hear the difference. So let's bypass everything and see where we started, and then we'll turn everything back on. So that's sounding pretty good for one mic. But I decided to take it one step farther. I think the drums sound cool like this, but depending on what else is in the song, it could potentially get buried fairly easily. If you've got a big wall of guitars and bass and vocals and everything, I think you'd start losing the kick and snare in this. So to take care of that, I duplicated this track. And you can hear this is the exact same thing. That's just our raw drum tone. And then I'm using Oxford Drum Gate. And again, I made a whole video on this. I absolutely love this gate. But what's really cool about it is it has these buttons over here, and it does a pretty good job of recognizing the different elements of the kit. So by setting this to kick, I can have this only open when the kick hits and mute everything else. Now from there, you've got a couple options. You could just EQ and compress that to give a little extra oomph and attack and presence to the kick. Or you can do what I did here and slap an instance of trigger on there. Here I'm using the smack kick, which is available over at bettermixes.com. And let's hear that by itself. So yeah, that's just that big, compressed, kind of aggressive sound that I was going for. And then we did the exact same thing on the snare drum here. Again, we set our Oxford drum gate to snare. And then put on trigger, and we're using the smack snare. And just a note, if you don't have Oxford drum gate, I totally think that's the best way to do this, but you can kind of get by some other ways. So let's say we're doing our snare here. We could sort of take an EQ and filter out everything but the snare as best we can. So by just focusing around the snare fundamental there, now we can probably use a normal gate. Let's just try this waves one. Hold on, let's turn the output of this down. That's way too hot. There, that's pretty good there. We were getting a couple of missed triggers, but if we messed with it more, we could probably get that working. And then you could throw your trigger on after that. But I seriously recommend the Oxford drum gate if you're trying to do crazy stuff like this, because it makes it way easier and does a really good job of it. But anyway, let's mix our samples in and see what we've got now. So that's sounding pretty darn cool. And all from one microphone. So if you're stuck recording drums with a minimal setup, give some of these techniques a try and see what you can do. So I hope you found this video helpful. And if you did, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. And head on over to bettermixes.com to grab a free copy of my Ultimate EQ cheat sheet. And while you're there, if you like the sound of the Smack Kit samples that I was using in this example, be sure to check them out. You can get that pack for only $15. And I also have a 100% free sample pack called the Monster Kit that you can grab.